When you need water, do you ask for it? Or do you grumble about the fact that you are thirsty? In both cases, the need is the same, and the need is legitimate. Without water, we die. So the suffering and misery of thirst is our body saying, this is important. And if our bodies can use a little misery to get what it needs, why can't we? Who says we can't? I'm often saddened by the misguided way Christians talk about feelings and experiences, often reducing them to simply positive or negative. People often act as though feeling bad means I am bad or I've done bad. They will confess anger or sadness or depression as if the feelings themselves are sins. By definition, a sin is a choice. A feeling is never a sin, though it might sometimes be the symptom of a sinful habit. The flip side of our moralizing emotions is that people also tend to assume that feeling good about something means it is good. That talk, that movie, that book made me feel good about myself, so it must be good. But if it let you continue a life of sin and selfishness and feel good about that, it's not good. After all, positivity would not explain Jesus' interaction with this Samaritan woman. She doesn't run into town to say, come see this man who made me feel good about myself. She says, come see a man who told me everything I have done. Surely, when he exposed her repeated sins of adultery and when he rebuked her for false belief and false worship, she must not have felt very good about that. And yet, something must have outweighed that shame and guilt and fear that came from exposing her sin and error. Surely his loving gaze, his sincerity, his courage with truth must have overridden the negative emotions to give her a reason to see the whole experience as genuinely good. And honestly, I get that. Some of the best moments of my life were full of negative emotions. I was suffering and even miserable in moments of guilt and shame and failure, and yet I look back on some of those moments with fondness. Because just as our bodies use the pain of being thirsty to tell us to drink water, so the misery of my soul in my darker moments, the misery of this woman at the well, told each of us to seek the living water of Jesus Christ. Which brings me back to my first question. When you are thirsty, physically, spiritually, emotionally, do you ask for water, or do you just grumble about it? The confusion about negative and positive emotions can make this question hard to answer. And the other problem is the way people around us will misuse the word complaining or grumbling to shut down a legitimate concern. Complaining, better yet, grumbling, properly defined, is a sin. But speaking out against injustice, communicating a legitimate need and right, shedding light on evil and abuse, these are not grumbling. A young child who constantly says, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, when they've had plenty to eat and drink, is complaining and grumbling. But if a child really hasn't had anything for hours and hours, telling an adult they are thirsty or hungry is not grumbling. It's legitimate communication of needs. Talking badly about your boss's weird habits, criticizing differences in style among your coworkers, that's great. That's complaining. It's grumbling. But if you're really being overworked and underpaid and mistreated, it's legitimate to demand fair compensation and respect. And the story of Moses and the Israelites kind of captures both of these dynamics. When Moses first goes to Pharaoh to tell him to let his people go, Pharaoh responds by saying, they're just complaining and grumbling. Make them work more. And he increases the workload. And when they complain that the workload is unfair and excessive, he again dismisses them. It's just complaining. But the Israelites are right. He is being unfair, unjust, and asking them to do so much work with so little support. And they have the right to worship God. Refusing to let them go and worship is an injustice, not complaining, not grumbling. But Pharaoh abuses that word to dismiss their demands. And yet, these same people who are on the wrong side of that, not long after the whole incident, we see our first reading. These same Israelites are in the desert with Moses. They've seen all 10 plagues. They literally just crossed the Red Sea, like a few weeks before this. And they have been receiving every day miraculous bread from heaven, the manna. And yet, though they had that miraculous bread that morning, they are thirsty. And what do? Do they ask Moses and God for water? No. They grumble. They sit around murmuring about how miserable they are, and they actually accuse God and Moses of leading them into the desert to kill them on purpose. Really? God miraculously sent plagues, split the Red Sea, and rained down manna from the sky so he could suddenly let you die of thirst in the desert? But the Israelites were so focused on the fact that they were suffering that they didn't think to turn to God to ask for what the misery was teaching them to ask for. This is no better than the child who says, "I'm hungry," while refusing to eat the food sitting right in front of them. We can excuse the child who does not yet know better, but what can we say for the Israelites or ourselves? Family, friendships, work, religion, and life itself all sometimes make us miserable. Being miserable is not a sin. It's a sign to us that something is wrong. Sometimes that misery can drive us to fix what's wrong. And when there is no solution, suffering can teach us to put less hope in the things of this world and more hope on the world to come, which will right every wrong, address every injustice. Being miserable is not a sin, but grumbling about your misery is. Grumbling is when we let our suffering convince us that God isn't good and spread that lie to others. Grumbling is when we let our suffering blind us to the goodwill of another person, focusing instead on their mistakes and weaknesses or even differences of opinion, representing them as evil to other people. When we unjustly poison the opinion of others against that person just because they can be a little difficult. Grumbling is also when we speak against anything that is good for us, but just unpleasant. If someone in your life is making you miserable because of what they say and do, you need to first ask yourself, am I suffering because they're treating me unjustly? Am I actually being harmed? Or is it just challenging me? If you are being harmed, then you should and can try to fix that without being guilty of grumbling. But when it's not injustice, when it's just discomfort or lack of control, or you can't fix it, do not think that grumbling will help. In either case, let your misery turn you toward God rather than away from Him. It is not a sin to tell God how miserable you are and why. It's not complaining when you tell God what is wrong. The Psalms do it all the time. Moses does it. When they complain to him, he turns and he cries out to God. The Samaritan woman complains, lets known her concerns, her need, when she says, "Sir, give me this water so that I may not be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." And yet for all that, notice that despite her request for physical water to solve the misery of her thirst, she ends up leaving that water jar empty on the ground to run into town to tell the good news. Because Jesus, instead of giving her physical water, gives her the living water of the Spirit to address the deeper misery, the deeper thirst of a soul caught in sin and error. And it might be that way with you and your concerns. When you are thirsty, when you are miserable and suffering, you have really two basic choices. You can either grumble and spread your misery around, or you can ask for what you need. So ask God for living water, for grace and wisdom and courage to address injustice when possible, when necessary, to endure with patience when it's just discomfort or there is no solution, and above all, to hope in Him who died for you so that you might truly live.